Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to today's PfH live webinar, which aims to explore how we as a sector can use the power of collaboration to develop more homes using modern methods of construction. We're all abundantly aware of the UK's social housing crisis and the skill shortages that exist across the various trades. And it's been widely publicised that MMC solutions are seen by many as the solution to the challenges that we're facing and can play a fundamental role in the delivery of high quality homes that we require. The views from many across the sector also suggest that the COVID pandemic has only strengthened the view that MMC should be considered as a mainstream solution due to the ability to produce homes in a controlled manufacturing environment. However, to date, examples of large-scale MMC developments are limited. The approach is often fragmented, with landlords operating independently, often delivering small pilot schemes with high degrees of customisation, therefore increasing the cost. There also remains a degree of nervousness about the different risk profile MMC presents compared to traditional construction methods, along with question marks over aspects such as design life accreditations, warranties, and mortgageability. To discuss some of these common barriers and to share their experiences of overcoming collaborative challenges, I'm delighted to welcome today Trina Chakravarti, who's the Project Director and Co-founder of Building Better. Building Better are a strategic alliance of housing associations working together to realise the benefits of off-site manufacture. And joining Trina, and we also have Paul Mullane, Director of Development and Growth for Halton Housing. Halton are a project board member of Building Better and play a central role in driving the strategic direction of the alliance. Before I hand over to the speakers, obviously we're online today, so questions a little bit more challenging. As we go through today's presentations, if you use the chat function at the bottom of your screen, we'll capture questions as we go through the presentations, and then time permitting at the end of the session, we'll run through as many of those questions as possible. So all it leaves me to do now is hand over to Trina. Thank you.
Hi everyone, lovely to see so many participants. I'm just going to say very quickly, this technology is new to me, so I'm really sorry if there are any hiccups. I apologize in advance. I'm just going to share my screen now for my presentation. Hopefully you can see the presentation. Rob, could you give me a hand, just a hand, thumbs up, brilliant, great. So good afternoon everyone. My name is Trina, as Rob said, and I set up Building Better with 4 other people, all from different housing associations at the end of the National Housing Federation's innovation program, the Greenhouse, a couple of years ago. My presentation is about 10 minutes, and I'm going to spend a couple of those outlining what Building Better is and the insight that led to its creation, as well as our aspirations around quality, efficiency, and net zero carbon. But I'll spend the majority of the time focusing on what I think will be more interesting to the audience today, which is why, even though collaboration has obvious advantages when it comes to developing using MMC, why it's not easy, what we've done to overcome the barriers that we've kind of encountered, and I'll finish with some tips for others looking to go down a similar path. So in a nutshell, Building Better is a strategic alliance of housing associations aggregating our demand to develop using MMC. And we're using standardization to drive efficiency in that process, which impacts the design, the procurement, and the delivery process, all of those different processes within it. The approach to developing Building Better has run throughout since its inception until now. And 2 things I thought would be interesting to draw out. Firstly, we've been committed to not starting from a blank sheet of paper. So much of our early insight was simply just not to keep starting from scratch. There's already so much expertise out there. And our first point of call was to mine those experiences of housing associations and development directors and draw it all together. Secondly, we made sure to test our ideas in small ways before making big commitments. So for example, we knew from very early on, asking very risk-averse organizations to share past failures and sign up to shared ownership over future potential liabilities is very much against their DNA. And to test those assumptions, we ran a number of experiments. In the first instance, we did a comparison of design specifications. We know that housing associations have historically guarded their employer requirements. But when we compared the ERs of 4 very different housing associations, we found 88% commonality. Similarly, we sent out an email promoting a fictitious, at the time, fictitious collaboration workshop where housing associations would come together to agree points of collaboration and red lines in their design requirements, just to check kind of interest in the idea. And ultimately, we got so much interest that we decided to run that workshop. This slide hopefully just gives you a flavor for some of the things that we heard and saw in our interviews and desk research. And there were certainly some key themes that emerged, 3 of which I'm just going to briefly touch on. The first was an over-reliance on the traditional construction industry, and this includes something that you'll all be familiar with, the skills crisis. And that includes the lack of younger entrants into the market, not least due to the conditions for working being tough, the lack of incentives to innovate, and the impact that that has on quality. But it also includes what development directors told us was a skills crisis within housing associations as well. So smaller organizations losing brilliant development staff to larger ones, and the general lack of land bidding skills. Secondly, we were told time and again that housing associations simply designed to get through planning, and that we've lost that clear role of design in a way that considers both the longer term maintenance, but also designing for what our tenants actually need. And finally, a complete lack of control or ownership because of the nature of current development contracts. So because of this existing culture of subcontracting, and in many cases, I think we counted between 9 to 14 tiers of subcontracting, we don't own risk, and this impacts quality. And there's an underlying issue here as well about relationships, and that they can be combated, not just with suppliers and contractors, but with our tenants too. And we think we can do something about this. In fact, we think we can get to a scale where we are producing thousands of homes within the next few years, and we can do this with highest quality and groundbreaking design at the heart of that delivery. So far, we're 10 housing associations and 1 consortium of 14. We've got a pipeline of another 20 housing associations and a growing list of interested local authorities. At the moment, our members have signed a consortium agreement, and we're starting to think about a separate legal entity. Both that light touch agreement on a collaborative relationship and the more formal legal union have their advantages and disadvantages, but we know that there is precedence for both. We know that Homes England are keen to support consortia of small and medium-sized housing associations through their strategic partnerships. And we also know that making that change from informal alliance to formal entity will depend on a couple of important factors, which I'd be happy to talk about later if people are interested in the questions. We work in partnership, and our first external partner was Mark Farmer and his organization CAST. They provide strategic advice based on their experience with the private market and local authorities. They're a really useful point of check and balance, and they've also supported us in getting traction on some of the wider barriers to MMC, such as loan securitization, mortgageability issues, or thinking about MMC in terms of different categories and systems rather than an ambiguous and nebulous whole. We appointed PfH in June as our procurement partner, and I include this here because it goes back to one of the early points I made about our approach. To find people to work with who have the right expertise, certainly, but it's been really important to us to find partners who share our values, and in that respect, I believe we've made some really good choices. Just to give you a sense of timeline, we're about to finalize our procurement strategy, launch our first procurement framework with 2 volumetric providers over the next few months, with a second framework with 2 panelized providers to launch shortly thereafter. We plan to have between 3 to 5 schemes in planning by April and 5 schemes in the ground by the end of next year, which we've been told is ambitious, but which is what we're aiming towards. And yeah, we're a team of 1.5, myself as full-time project director, and we've got Jake Snell from Radian, who's part-time project manager as well. Together, we have 3 aims: deliver better quality homes, reduce operating costs through using data effectively, and have happier residents involved in the design process. Now, the starting point of this presentation is that there are clear advantages to working together, and they broadly fit under 2 themes. The first is around achieving scale. An aggregated pipeline means you're more attractive to manufacturers, and this increases your collective bargaining power, obviously, but there are knock-on effects as well. So firstly, on market engagement, it's easier to do this when you're seen as a credible partner or a client, and crucially, scale means getting to the cost point that you need. Secondly, around sharing risk and reward, I don't want to understate the benefit of only paying once rather than shelling out individually for the cost of consultants on procurement advice, due diligence on manufacturers. I mean, just as a reference point, one of our members spent over £60,000 just to get to the point of figuring out what system of MMC and materials to go with, and that is excluding all of the additional costs you might incur if you wanted to get advice from a BIM consultant, for example, or the cost of then procuring the products. And the less explored benefits are around future rewards, particularly data and design, and I've got a couple of extra slides on these. In design, we found in our research that ambition in design is very much lacking, and it's not because housing associations don't want to do it, it's that the system doesn't allow for it. We think we can be much more ambitious in terms of designing for tenant needs, and MMC gives us a great platform to do this. We can also design out maintenance by employing a robust feedback loop, and our plan is to have post-occupancy tests feeding back into the designs. Working together means we're in a stronger position to create those longer term relationships with manufacturers, sharing insights between ourselves and making iterative improvements to the design. We've already had agreement between members on the basic specification, and it's been important to keep it really high level so our members don't get into the nitty-gritty details on taps, for example, but to focus on the performance and keeping an eye towards pushing for a higher standard. We know that by using MMC and working with the right partner, we can get to a place where our homes are inclusive and accessible and more sustainable. And that even if the manufacturers can't currently provide net zero carbon or future home standard, we won't rule them out if they can show us a clear path towards achieving those standards in the near future. I just want to say a little bit more on post-occupancy testing here because it's important in two respects. I think it will provide better understanding on resident experiences, but it's also important for maintenance teams. For tenants, data will help us understand how we can improve the livability, if there's enough storage, how can the spaces change and adapt over time. And for maintenance teams, you can see how making detailed property information available will allow our members, they can see for themselves which components are working and which aren't, and start planning for proactive asset management. Our initial thinking at the moment as well is that this data will be stored in a pool rather than siloed, and we've been talking to Amazon for some advice on how to approach this. I want to underscore the point that improvement has to be built into the process and that it will be iterative, and it's important that we select the right manufacturer to partner with to enable that. Just quickly, just to set out the scale of the opportunity, we're starting with 800 homes, but our members have said that number is closer to 4,500 in the next few years. We're focusing on getting the right process, demonstrating value through that improved quality, and we're confident that once we can prove the concept, the pipeline of interested housing associations and local authorities is very much there. So the challenges, I mean, the first one's pretty obvious. Organizations have different appetites for risk. Even where development directors may be aligned, their boards may want more or less reassurance depending on previous experiences, their size, their culture. And that's borne out in different attitudes to the best procurement strategy, for example. But the more difficult ways this presents is in signing any legal or contractual documents. The minute any director has to sign anything to do with shared collective liability, it feels scary, and this has probably been our toughest hurdle to date, and I'll say a bit more about this in the next slide. Competing timeframes, we have members who came on board 18 months ago and others who joined 4 or 5 months ago. Many of the former are keen to get going and have sites ready to go through the process, but equally they can't wait endlessly. So we've just had to take a really practical view on this and think about it as a numbers game, by which I mean you build the pipeline of as many sites as possible and then plan for an absolute minimum to get that traction that you need. Conflicting motivations. I touched on this slightly on a previous slide, but for some members, meeting net zero carbon or the future home standard is an absolute priority, whereas for others, it's less important. And we've been able to navigate that by agreeing to get a solid baseline product and being clear on where our aspiration is, and then seeing those as enhanced options available through the manufacturer. And finally, the scope of work. I mean, this is something that's honestly only presented very recently. And I guess it's in part due to where the project is at and that we've been able to make progress. So as an example, when thinking about the process of a housing association putting through a site, it's clear that Building Better can add a lot of value acting as the party working for the client side, ensuring the manufacturers don't leave off smaller sites that are less attractive, for example, but equally working for the supply side, helping to manage factory flow. And given all of our ambitions around data and design, it's going to be important to agree exactly what we do, but crucially what we don't do. And our plan is to have a relook at our strategic objectives come October once the framework is live. This is my final slide, and I wanted to leave you with some questions that could be helpful for any organizations thinking about going down this route. Of course, if you're interested in finding out more about building better, please do just get in touch. But fundamentally, I'm of the view that the more of us that are trying to do this, the better for everyone. And so I'd be happy to share more outside of this forum as well. First of all, being sold behind the same vision and ambition. Housing associations may have competing organizational strategy, but operationally, you're very likely to find a lot of common ground, and navigating through differing motivations in trying to find that common ground is made much easier if you can agree and feel sold on a collective ambition and end goal. And this links to the next question. I mean, my background is in marketing and product development, and anyone with a similar background will know about the adoption curve. For any new idea or technology, you can usually break down the population into different segments based on their behaviors and risk appetite. And this point is basically about making sure engaging with the right people, which in our case was the first two groups, the pioneers and the early adopters. Our sector is made up of organizations across these groups, and I think it's important to be able to place your partners you want to work with now and future partners in the right groups to be able to approach them when the time is right. And then with respect to external partners, figuring out the types of relationships you want as the basis for choosing the right organization, I think is also really important. The third, what are your priorities? I mean, we did a lot of research on previous groups of housing associations and local authorities who came together to collaborate. And an example is the Modular Alliance. There's a recurring theme of feedback from people who've been part of those groups, which was to focus on the process rather than the product. And approach the process from the right way around. So rather than trying to have the perfect idea of a home or the design specification, understand the very basic minimum requirement, the route that you need to go to take that very basic minimum requirement to the ambition, compare what's on the market, and if you find something that's 80% there, make the choice to use that with the commitment to make the improvements year on year to get to that ambition. What are the risk and reward structures? I put this as a question, and frankly, I don't have the answer to it because I think we're still figuring it out. My sense is there's no easy answer to this, but that we need to explore more of what's possible in the way of legal contracts and entities before making that decision. The fifth one, how will you work? And here, I think this is a point around the trade-off between being agile and considered. It's important to have a clear idea of what individual members want to have sign off or oversight on versus what the team has autonomy to get on and do, because this will ensure project speed. So it's important to have the right culture and be clear on the lines where the lines are for sign off. And finally, dedicated resource. And feedback we've had from our members and other groups collaborating is that development directors are already incredibly busy, but have previously been expected to do this almost as a side project. But this is not an easy piece of work, and having dedicated staff ensures commitment to getting agreement on the thornier areas. We've been able to develop a relationship with Homes England and MHCLG, for example. We have input on the National Housing Federation's comprehensive spending review submission. But also, and I don't want to understate this, the importance of keeping momentum going, because given everything that we're hearing from government, including the speech from the Secretary of State a few weeks ago, there is a window of opportunity for MMC and a real chance for us as housing associations to be seen as ambitious and entrepreneurial. So if we can't make this work now, then when? That's it from me, and I'm going to hand over to Paul by stopping my screen share. Thanks, everyone, and if you have questions at the end, I'm happy to answer anything.
Okay, hi there. I'm now going to share my screen. Hopefully that will work. Bear with me. Hopefully you can see that. Can people see that? Yeah. Okay. My name's Paul Milan. I'm the development director at Holton Housing. I've been asked to come along. I'm a fairly newbie into building better. Joined probably in February of this year. So I've been asked just to give a bit of an overview of our journey with MMC and why we've decided to go with building better. A few things I'll just take you through as to who we are, my personal take of MMC, experience to date, our motivations, and then just a few takeaways on building better, but also what I might do differently if I was doing it again. So just a very quick introduction to Holton Housing. Very much we're about improving people's lives, and that is both our employees. We employ just over 330 staff, but also our customers. We have about 7,000 properties, mainly in Widnes and Runcorn, which is part of the Liverpool City region. But we're also starting to look to develop in other local authorities, and we've got another 3 local authorities that we're currently active within. So as an organisation, innovation and challenging the norm has been a big driver for us over many years. I suppose recent experience has been a very good part of that, with COVID hit. And we put a lot of time and effort into our infrastructure and very much living the principle that work is something you do, not necessarily something that you come into. And therefore we had invested heavily in agile working and remote working. So actually the day that we shut the office down, that's all we shut down. The business fully continued to function and had no hiccups and no falls or trips or anything of that nature, which I guess is just a real credit to how we as a business are about trying to push the norm and doing things slightly differently, but doing things that for the right reason, I think is another key aspect. And we continue to have an ambitious growth plan. We currently have a target of building or acquiring over 1,000 homes. We're well on the progressing with that, and in fact we're starting to look at the next chunk of funding, as I'm doing quite a good job of spending the tea as it is. So that's us. So my kind of personal take on MMC. It's a kind of a bit of a time journey, this, isn't it? It's been around for a very long time. It comes and goes and comes into favour and drops off again, but it never seems to have got the full traction it probably deserves. And has probably got some baggage from previous schemes that have been done at scale which haven't worked. But as for me as a development director, when I've looked at MMC and how I take my business forward in relation to that, I find it kind of splits into 2 ways at the moment. One is there's large scale suppliers out there, and that's great. They've got products and all the rest. But the problem is because they're large and the scale that they need, the program that I have and the orders that I could bring to them probably aren't of interest to them. And therefore you fundamentally start to write down the benefit of having MMC at the start. You then get the sector in MMC is stuffed full with small startup companies, loads of passionate people with fantastic ideas about how to do stuff. But quite a lot of them haven't actually got anything in the ground or only just in the process of it. So then you're dealing with a very young company, you're dealing with startups, you're dealing with companies that have all the right wish and will, but maybe not have all the right detail and processes actually in place. So as a business, I'm faced with 2 elements that kind of make it a bit scary to think about how to do it and how best to go forward. And I guess a thing that we all do quite well within the sector, whenever we're faced with a dilemma like that, we like to come up with pilot schemes. Sorry, that's the best slide I could get. So on that, in true form, we did come up with a pilot scheme. In fact, we came up with 2. So I just want to take you quickly through these. Like every development director in the country, I've got photographs of sites. So on the first site, we very much went, it was a small infill site. There was 4 homes to be constructed. We went for a panelised system as our first entry into MMC. And this is, craning in the panels. You can see the panel just in the background with the wrapping around it. And I'll do that. What's really interesting, it is a modern method of construction. It is taken away from traditional, but there's still a lot of on-site activity, as you can see here. It's good, it speeds things up, etc. But actually, it's still not the whole answer. And what you get with a panelised system is you end up with a space, a void inside that you need to go and fill and build out the interiors, and you're using traditional methods to do that. We tried in this scheme, we have our own maintenance technicians, so plumbers, plasterers, lackeys, etc. So we kind of went off to see if that would work. The quality and the process was really good. So when you look at the project, it was brilliant. But when you stand back as a business, and actually was nicking resources from another part of the business to feed this, and then actually to either backfill that is really expensive, or it has an impact on the delivery or other aspects to our customers. So that for us was quite a big learning curve on that, and probably one that we wouldn't do again. But again, we got the houses completed, and there they are, sunny day. It worked really well. Customer feedback was really good. So from the quality side of that was good, with very few defects or ongoing maintenance issues with them. But on the three targets that you have when you look at the scheme, whether you have time, cost, and quality, quality tick, yes, absolutely. Low running costs, etc., for customers. Time, it overran extensively, and cost went up an awful lot. So actually, if I was judging this scheme in isolation, 2/3 of my indicators would say don't touch it with a barge pole. So not one to be put off. I took on a second scheme. And this is where the risk with pilots comes in. You start getting a bit giddy. So we ended up deciding that we had a scheme infill site again for 8 homes, and that we'd have a bit of a system of. So as well as doing the panelized system as we had before, we decided we'd go full modular. Now, if you talk about MMC, very soon in that discussion, scale comes in as being a real key need to deliver the cost efficiency. So if I'm doing 4 houses on a modular and 4 houses on a panelized, you're not going to be surprised whenever I say the cost didn't work out very well on the scheme, but we did gain a lot still from doing it. So again, this is just some as I say, some sites and pictures from site where you get the more most people think of modern methods is a modular being delivered on site with kitchens and all already fitted. As I say, we also went for the panelized systems. That's the panelized arriving with them getting craned in as well. And again, you end up with that void. What we did on this scheme is that we then had to bring in a contractor to do the interiors for the panelized system and then the externals, etc. So I now have 3 different contracting bodies on this site, 4 if you put my business into it. It's a perfect storm brewing, and I have to say we came very close to that perfect storm coming in and biting us really hard whenever one of the organizations looked like they were about to go under. And what you find whenever you have a multiple number of people on site, if something goes wrong, they all point the other way, and it's always somebody else's fault. But ultimately, it will become my fault as I'm the client. So again, quite a lot to take in for that from our point of view. But at the end of the day, the quality. So this was the panelized system, and that was the modular. Eagle-eyed overview will spot there were some very minor differences, but fundamentally, funny enough, they look like a house, which they should do. And customer feedback was really good. We put a bit too much additional technology into it, and therefore we found that people. The technology that we bolted in didn't work as well, kind of thing. So that again was a bit about keeping it simple. And again, that's the kind of two schemes there. So it worked very well. Again, cost was overran, time overran. So I went back to board with an overall lessons learned from the 2 schemes. I think the main things for me is if you're doing an MMC, you need to make that decision at the concept. Don't do as we did, is halfway through after planning thinking, do you know what, it'd be cracking if we got MMC on board. It's got to be a fundamental part of what you're doing. If you have new products that you're going to put in, new technology, make sure you fully understand what it's going to do and how it's going to work, how your customers will use it, how you're going to monitor it. It's amazing how many schemes are put in and people never monitor how well they perform. And again, that should be part of your inception stage on doing that. For us as a business, as I mentioned before, although we have skilled technicians, we didn't have the skill to run construction sites, nor did we feel that the benefit of us running it directly was offset by the loss of other parts of the business. So therefore, for us, it was very important for us to get a partner supplier at the early stage that we can work with to actually deliver MMC going forward. Any partner for us, we need to make sure there's a really robust process to do, but it's still, it looks at quality and is not driven by price. Because again, I think that's a key aspect in the traditional construction industry that is struggling, is cost is the driver, and a lot of what falls out of that is design, and therefore the long-term maintenance issues associated with that. And again, for us, I think a big lesson is You need to accept what you're given. We all think we've got this fantastic different way of looking at constructing a house, and actually it's a house or it's an apartment. And really there's not a lot of difference. There might be different bolt stuff we can bolt to, but fundamentally on MMC you've got to accept what you get. If you start tweaking with it or playing with it or altering it, you will increase the cost, increase the time, and probably bring in some potential failure at a later point. So for me, from the lessons going to board, I went to board. We have a fantastic board. They were supportive of it. They approved that MMC was still something we should go for. You know, we'd learned a lot. We had the scars to prove it from the pilots. What they did say with pilots, though, is no more pilots. Let's crack on and do this. If we're going to do it, we need to do it seriously. And that's brilliant. The problem is, it gives me a bit of a dilemma, because I go back to that original point of it's either big suppliers or small startups. And as me as a business, how do I bring that in? As you can see, I've been pondering this question for quite a while. I was a bit younger when I started. But for me, whenever Building Better came along, it seemed to really gel together. A lot of what I felt was the stepping stone for me going forward, Building Better could actually help me with it. So my motivations around Building Better is working with them is very much like-minded organizations and people within it. It's not just a talking shop. I know, as Trina mentioned before, you know, BB members have invested money into this and resourced and able to ensure that we get delivery from it, which is a really key aspect. It enables me to deliver a response back to my boards, and that list of lessons that we've learned in essence is a checklist for me to go back to my board with, and I believe Building Better actually enables me to do that. For me, it was clear that Building Better actually had taken time to understand issues, so they hadn't just run ahead and said we must get units on site, which is a classic development kind of mentality. But by recognizing it, I think they clearly thought the process out of what needs to be done. But they've also, to be fair to them, stayed focused on what they're trying to do. So, for example, the decision about the framework that we use, do we try to set up our own framework or do we go with an existing one? Well, setting up your own framework would have some benefit, but actually it would take you away from the key bit is getting MMC out and being delivered. It also, for me, it enables me very much to move on to my next stage in the journey of MMC, but also importantly, at a manageable stage, I'm able to dictate at what size of schemes I put into it, kind of thing, but I'm not having to commit everything to MMC, extra M then. However, as we mentioned before, by pulling our resources together, actually, what happens is we all start to benefit from that larger volume of delivering at scale. And I think another key thing is manufacturers start to be interested in you because they see Building Better as being that continuous process kind of thing, and they're not having to continue to go and work and make new relationships. They've got this ongoing process consortia that will have a program that goes on for a good number of years, and that is like a golden thread to them. And also, I just think the ability for Building Better to grow, the more people that get involved, the more benefit to the wider Building Better consortium. So, and then finally for me, I'm obviously sitting up in Liverpool City region. I also wanted to make sure that this becomes very much a deliverable product, both within the north and the south kind of thing. So that's a real key driver for me to get involved. So for me, just quickly, wrapping up then, for me, the takeaways about Building Better are, for me, no, I don't need to do any more pilot schemes because I'm tapping into a wide range of knowledge and thought out process, so I don't need to do that. The drive and the passion of Building Better is just great to work with. It's a real breath of fresh air in being able to do that, and it's resourced. It also gives us the ability to look at wider issues in the sector, zero carbon and the fallout from COVID, all these kind of aspects can still be picked up and worked with as a consortium to try and ensure that our future products are future-proofing us as best as possible. And also, I think, it goes back to that deliverability. I genuinely believe Building Better will enable me to deliver, because fundamentally that's what I'm employed to do. and I've got to ensure I put my time and resource into doing that. And I believe Building Better can do that for me, and me working with them as well. So the final thing then for me is what would I do different? Key thing I think in changing your mindset is thinking that this is more about working with a manufacturer than construction. Because if you do that, that will fundamentally quiz or question the way that you think about doing stuff. What a lot of people do with MMC is they take construction targets, construction planning, construction the way they do it, agreements, etc., and they're trying to apply that to MMC, and then they can't work out why it doesn't work, and it's because it's a manufacturing environment, which links back into construction, but fundamentally it's a manufacturing. And if you get that in your head, you then start to see a bit more clarity. And around that, I then think you need to have a different knowledge back. So again, on some of the pilots I worked for, I was getting consultants in to do the roles they would do in a construction job, and then finding out some of them just didn't have an awful lot to do because actually the manufacturing process was doing what they would normally do. So again, you need to then think about what are the right people to have involved. Don't get giddy. We love pilots. We love doing things differently. What you can do is stuff too many things into one process, and then it starts to unpick it just because it's got overcomplicated. I think taking it nice, steady steps is absolutely the way to do it. And then finally, for me, I wouldn't bother reinventing the wheel. You know, start to collaborate. The one thing I do think about MMC over the last, say, 4 or 5 years is it really has moved on. There are others. There's Building Better. There's others out there. For me, I want to get Modern Methods Construction working, and Building Better is one way of doing it. So for me, it's get out there and do it, really. So thanks for listening. I can't see paper faces being pulled, so I'm just going to assume that hopefully you found that of interest. But the one thing I would say is go out and get involved. It really is. If you're going to do modern methods of construction, now's the time to do it. All the ducks are lining up. There's a lot of advantage. It will bring new entrants in, which is increasingly more important, I think, as well. But it will increase the quality of the product that our customers get, and I think will also drive down the running costs for them as well. And on that point, I'll stop sharing and tune back in.
Paul, Trina, thank you very much for that. It was really, really insightful. And as you would expect, we've had a number of questions come through. Just before I jump into those questions, it looks like 1 or 2 may have had some issues with the audio. So apologies if that's the case. This webinar is recorded, so what we will do is if there is an issue, we'll make sure that you get a copy of this, and you can sit back and watch it in your own time. First question, Trina, I think you've responded already in the chat bar, but just in case people haven't seen it. So first question for you is, will the post-occupancy testing be purely digital energy use data, or will there be occupant engagement regarding satisfaction with their spaces? You okay to pick that one up, Trina?
Yeah, the short answer is both. All as much as we can do, as much as is helpful. I think there is a risk that we try and collect too much information, and what do you do with that information, who holds on to all this stuff. So it's like with everything in Building Better, it is that balancing the aspiration with what is achievable. I think trying to be really realistic with a basic minimum, and then being able to build on that is the approach that we're going to take. But just in answer to your question, both of those things as a minimum.
Thank you. The next question then we've got is aimed at you, Paul, if you're okay to pick this one up. So the question we've had is, are you considering MMC to provide quick, good quality solutions on meanwhile sites?
I think it's for me, it's looking at any particular opportunity. I think MMC. I think some people think MMC is all or nothing, and I think for me MMC is just like it's another one of the tools for me to be able to use. And I think it's very much about the site is whenever you bring the site. I think now if I'm doing MMC, it's got to be at the beginning of it. So I guess it's whenever you're along that process. if you bring MMC into an existing project that's got planning and all the rest, it really does start to unpick the balance, unpick the balance of it and the benefit of it. So for me, it's really site generated. If it works for the site and you bring it in at the right time, I don't see why not.
Okay. And a further question that we've had then. So have there been challenges with securitization? And if so, how have these challenges been overcome?
So this is a really interesting one because what we've heard from our members and just more widely across the sector is that there are challenges with securitization. So Building Better with Mark Farmer and the National Housing Federation have been part of trying to move that conversation on. Most recently, I think about 3 weeks ago, we had a meeting with valuers, lenders, housing associations, Mark and the Federation. And I saw that Ruby's on the call as well from Whitwell Sherwood. These are conversations that were taking place a year ago as well. And it feels like there's just not enough momentum. So the point of this meeting was to try and unpick what the challenges were. When it came down to it, what the lenders said was that housing associations haven't approached them. And so they haven't been able to think about loan securitization in any comprehensive way because the demand hasn't been there. I think there's been some feedback to suggest that that's maybe not entirely true, or maybe that they've gone to different people within within those organizations. So where we're at now is the valuers are coming back with a shopping list, and that the next stage of that conversation is taking place in a couple of weeks' time. If anyone is interested in more on this, Stuart, please feel free to just shoot me an email or drop me a message afterwards, and I can pick this up with you for more of the detail on it. But I guess the short answer is there have been challenges. Valuers are saying people are not coming to them yet in any real kind of amount of scale, and we're trying what we can to move the conversation forward.
Thanks, Trina. Paul, is there anything you want to add further to that?
Yeah, it's certainly something that we've been mindful of, and to date, the two schemes that we've done have both been for affordable rent. So certainly, we're not trying to sell the product at the minute, and it was around that. It's partly to do with what do funders think of it, but also what does the public think of it. And I think that's something that we need to take into account. Also, they kind of been able to secure them or use them as assets to kind of secure loans as a business. To date, we haven't done that because we've got a program of other properties and schemes that we're kind of doing. And again, I suppose we've kept this back until there is further clarity within the funding sector that actually it's not something to kind of run away from and do that. So again, we're very supportive of the work Building Better is doing in relation to that, because the more we can understand what the fear is, the better we can do something about it.
Thank you. I think that's everything in terms of questions. So I guess that really just leaves me then just to close the session. So Paul, Trina, obviously we can't thank you in the usual way and show our appreciation with a round of applause. So I guess just on behalf of PfH and all the attendees that have taken time to dial in today, just a massive thank you. Really appreciate your time and your insight today. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, everyone.
You're welcome. See you.
Okay.